partners and the City of Toronto. This has truly been a citywide effort as we've worked closely with all areas of the public sector to secure the city. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the members of the Toronto Police Service. In all units and at all ranks, they have been working diligently
either road closures or the increased presence of uniformed police officers can be concerning to those local residents and businesses. As we did last weekend, we will do our very best to balance our need to ensure public safety and causing minimal disruption as possible. We appreciate the patience of everyone, and we are hopeful this level of cooperation will continue throughout the coming weekend. As the Chief has mentioned, I will be on the ground again this weekend, and I will be available to provide updates as needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. I'll now invite Mayor Tory to make some comments.
Well, thank you, Chief Raymer and Superintendent Pogue, for the update ahead of this weekend and for working to make sure that the public has as much of the information as the police can make public on this issue. I'm here at the police headquarters today to make sure that people know of my continued support as mayor for the work that our police service is doing in partnership with the city to protect our city. This is an extremely troubling time for the country. I know people are upset by what they're seeing and what they're experiencing. Everyone, including me, is very frustrated by the length and the overall impact of this pandemic. We just want it to be over, and we just want to get back to our lives as we knew them. And I know those who have been directly occupied, or those who have been directly impacted by these illegal occupations are beyond being upset. People are not upset by peaceful, legal, respectful process. They're not. I've seen that over and over again in this city and elsewhere. Even when they disagree with the reason for protests, they see peaceful, respectful process for what it is, a crucial part of a healthy democracy. But what we are seeing goes way beyond that, way beyond peaceful and respectful, and way outside of the law. And that has people, including me, upset beyond the frustration of the pandemic itself. There's enough frustration from the pandemic. People are losing jobs. They're losing time out of their lives. They're losing their rights to go about their own lives peacefully and safely. All of this is so unfair to them. And I want those whose lives are being turned upside down by all of this to know that I feel very sad for everything that they're going through, and we're trying to do everything we can to deal with that. As mayor of Canada's largest city, I support the Government of Canada and the Government of Ontario working together to do all that they can to support police in bringing an end to this. I want to thank Premier Ford for declaring a state of emergency in Ontario. Today, he was extremely clear that it is time for these illegal occupations to end and for people to go home. It's time. It's time when looked at within the frame of everyone else's rights, and it's time in terms of the overall well-being of our country and our founding mantra. Our founding mantra as a country: peace, order, and good government. We are so close to the end of this pandemic. We've made it through the Omicron surge. Ontario has set a clear path forward. The province has stated that when public health restrictions will be over, they've stated when this will happen. There's a calendar, there's dates and times and places. And they'll be indicating at the same time when those temporary restrictions will come to an end. Because millions of people, including more than 2.5 million people right here in the city of Toronto, have done the right thing and got vaccinated. And that's why that timetable is going to be met. The people who got vaccinated are themselves the ones ending this pandemic, and I want to thank the vast majority of people who have done the right thing and who keep doing the right thing. Last weekend, Toronto Police worked carefully and capably, and I could use other adjectives in terms of their professionalism, and their competence, and their steadiness to keep our residents in this city of Toronto safe during the convoy protests. I am thankful for that good police work that happened under the capable leadership of Chief Raymer and all of his command, and for the fact that they kept the hospitals that surround Queen's Park safe, not just the hospitals, but all of our frontline healthcare workers and all of the patients and all of the people in neighborhoods who make up the 3 million people who live here. Those who showed up to protest were, by all accounts, almost all accounts, peaceful and respectful. And I'm thankful for that too. As I said last week, peaceful and respectful protest is how we do things here. Peaceful and respectful is just how we do things. Now, we anticipate, or we at least have to be ready for another protest this weekend. We deal with protests almost every weekend in this city, and that's not a complaint. Police have taken action as properly they should have to prepare for this weekend, and I continue to support the work they're doing and the efforts they will undertake to try to ensure that we have another peaceful and safe weekend in this city, and the city will provide every bit of support that it can in that regard. It is my continued hope, if people are determined to gather again to protest in Toronto, that a commitment to peaceful protest will be fully demonstrated. That people, once they have exercised their rights, will recognize the rights of their fellow citizens and return peacefully to their homes, knowing that their views have been registered. The city continues to provide full support, as it will, to the police to prepare for this weekend. And I'll say once again, I support Chief Raymer and the women and men of the Toronto Police Service 100% in their work to keep this city peaceful and safe. We all want to do everything we can, absolutely everything we can, to try and avoid the situations that we're seeing in Ottawa and in Windsor. Two cities where I have stayed in touch with their mayors to offer support during very challenging times for them. We want everyone to be safe, and while elected officials can't direct the police, and properly so, I am here today to help to deliver a message loudly and clearly that illegal behavior or any actions that threaten public safety cannot be tolerated in the city of Toronto. Again, if you're planning to come here for a protest that is not peaceful and that is not respectful, I would urge you on behalf of all Toronto residents and businesses most sincerely to please just stay away from our city. And please reconsider that planned behavior, even if it is just out of respect for your fellow citizens, let alone respect for the rule of law. I know the road closures put in place are disruptive to some residents and businesses, though my experience last weekend was people in the city of Toronto understood that and they accepted the need for that. This is about public safety in general and protecting our hospitals and everyone who works there and every resident of the city of Toronto, including people who seek care in those hospitals. I want to again be absolutely clear that I support Toronto Police taking necessary action to prepare for protests with a focus on doing everything they can to protect the safety of Toronto residents and businesses and to minimize any disruptions to Toronto residents and businesses to the greatest possible extent. And I want to reiterate my firm beliefs that, and these are beliefs that I believe are shared by the vast majority of Toronto residents. People should not be blocked from receiving emergency care or any medical care, and hospital workers of all kinds should be able to freely and safely come and go from their workplaces. Businesses have every right to be open and not to be disrupted. Residents who live here should not have their ability to enjoy a safe and peaceful life unduly impacted. I know that we will get through this weekend again and the days to come. And I know that as a country, we will get through these incredibly challenging times. Once we do, I think it will be timely and very necessary to try to have a long, careful reflection on the polarization we're seeing in a country admired for its ability to work things through collectively time after time, year after year. I want to thank Toronto residents and businesses for their continued patience and understanding. I know that that patience and understanding isn't endless. And I very much want to thank once again all of the police officers and city staff who are working to keep our city and all of its residents safe. We will get through this thanks to their hard work and dedication to duty. Our city is strong, it is understanding, it is peace-loving, and it is respectful. And may those qualities prevail at a very challenging time. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. We'll now take questions. So when you're called on, please unmute your mic at this time only, and please indicate who your question is for. So Chief James Raymer, Mayor John Tory, or Staff Superintendent Lauren Pogue. You'll have one question and follow up. Once you've asked your question, you'll be muted again. So first we have Chris Glover from CBC. Chris, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. And this first one is for the chief, I believe. My question is, are police going solely off of social media posts, or have you guys actually spoken to organizers of this anticipated protest in Toronto? Because I just got off the phone with one of the people who identified himself as one of the Toronto area organizers of the original protest convoy. And he said that this anticipated Toronto protest actually has nothing to do with them, that those social media posts were spam or misdirects. So the big question here is, how is Toronto Police getting its intel here, and what is police expecting to see in terms of what this anticipated protest will actually look like, who will be there, and if it will include large vehicles like trucks or not?
Well, thank you for the question. The first thing I will say is that our intelligence is not based merely on social media posts. We have a very elaborate and robust intelligence operation that incorporates the entire province and all the agencies within that province at both the municipal, provincial, and federal level. So our intelligence is actually quite robust. I'm not going to go into specifically what it is, but I can assure you that it is very robust.
Thank you. And Chris, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I do. This one is for the chief, and also Mayor Tory, if you could weigh in on this one as well. The question here is, what is an acceptable protest versus when is it time to step in? I mean, if protesters are trying to dig in and stay here, like we've seen in Windsor and in Ottawa, what's the threshold or the timeline for when police and local authorities will step in and stop it?
Well, perhaps I should start with that. What I will say to you is that we are here to preserve public safety and facilitate peaceful protest. And peaceful protest does not include vehicles jamming up the roadways. So we will facilitate any type of protest tomorrow, as we do week in and week out throughout the year, that people want to do that protest peacefully. But again, where I can tell you from, and that's why we've engaged in the activities we've had, or that we are doing and are currently doing, to not have the roadways and seats of government jammed up and occupied. So that's what we're attempting to stop and will not be tolerated.
I'll just say that I think a lot of people, a lot of the time, have a hard time understanding the difficulty that's involved in the discretion that is exercised by all police everywhere in carrying out their duties, because they precisely have to answer a question just like that, as to when is enough too much. But I will say that I think when we see instances where, and I've talked a lot this week about the fact that there are many sets of rights that have to be taken into account here. Yes, there are the rights of people to peaceful and hopefully respectful protest. And the words peaceful and respectful are an important part of that. But those have to be, weighed against, and it's part of the difficulty that police have to engage in and day out, the rights of other people to go about their business, to go to work, to go to the hospital without harassment, to go to work at the hospital without harassment, to just move about their city, to live in peace and quiet. And so there comes a time, and it's hard to measure whether it's minutes, hours, or days. There comes a time when it's just too much. And I think, as I said earlier, when Premier Ford declared the state of emergency today, it's time. Some people would say it was time before now, but it's certainly time now. And I think that is part of what the police have to decide, and they're very difficult and important responsibilities.
Thank you. Austin Delaney from CTV News, do you have a question?
I do. It's for the chief. Chief, what is your intelligence telling you? What kind of numbers can we expect? Are you looking at people, number of people? Are you looking at trucks, number of trucks?
Oh, I'm not going to really discuss the specific intelligence, Austin, but we are preparing for every eventuality, and we have a very robust plan that is very nimble and allows us to scale up or scale down whatever is required.
And if, Chief, if they start to look like they're going to park and stay for a while, what's the plan there? Do you plan on towing them? How will you move people out?
We're going to help them leave.
And what does that mean?
Well, we have assets in place to make sure if people are, if vehicles are engaged and they're not moving, we're going to move them out of the way.
Thanks,
you.
Austin. Next, we have Wendy Gillis from the Star. Wendy, go ahead with your question.
Thank you so much. This question is for Staff Superintendent Polk as well as Chief Raymer. I'm just wondering how you are sorting through sort of the misinformation that might be coming your way around threats of arrival of protesters. How are you determining what's legitimate and what's, you know, sort of a part of a game, as some of the organizers have said this week?
Thank you, Wendy. Again, as the chief has said, I don't really want to comment on specific intelligence, but I can tell you that we certainly we look at all of the intelligence coming in, and we certainly try to source that for credibility, as well as working with all of the law enforcement partners across the province as well to determine what to expect here. And again, as the chief said, we do have a plan, and we plan for many different scenarios, and we're prepared for that.
Actually, Wendy, I will comment, and it's actually a very good question. There is, we know, deliberately a lot of disinformation, misinformation out there that very much complicates the province. It is an organized group of people that are trying to make it difficult for police agencies across the province. We believe some of them are deliberately trying to tax our resources. So we have to weigh all the information the best we can with all our partners and do the best we can, and that's what we're trying to do. But you're absolutely right, that strategy is out there.
Go ahead with your follow-up, Wendy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that answer. And you did mention, Chief, just sort of drawing on resources. I am wondering if you could give us a sense of what impact this is having on deployment. I'm sure officers are being pulled off of their regular assignments. Can you give us any sense of what the impact this is having?
Yes, we're another good question, Wendy. We are able to maintain our business continuity throughout the city. We are redeploying plainclothes assets that are now into uniform. We, of course, have people on overtime and callbacks. We have a lot of city assets that are assisting us. So it really is an all hands on deck at all ranks, civilians as well that are assisting us in these operations. You'll notice our fleet services, several of our Toronto Police Service tow trucks are out there as well, so we can move very, very quickly if need be. So it really is an all hands on deck approach, but business continuity is being maintained, and we're collaborating very much with our partners across the province, and in particular our GTA partners.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mark McAllister for City News. Mark, do you have a question?
I do, thank you. It's for Chief Raymer as well. You had said basically we'll simply move them if they get in the way. I'm just curious what that involves exactly. You had also said subject to enforcement. So what does enforcement mean? How do you move them out?
We have extremely well-trained public order personnel and commanders on the ground that will make those determinations as the situation develops. What I will say is that we are not going to allow encampments. That's priority one. Well, I shouldn't say it's priority. It's our priority is to maintain the safety of all the public and our hospitals, and that's why, and the seats of government. But in terms of our strategies, the priority will be to allow peaceful protests, but not allow encampments and to occupy roadways.
And do you have a follow-up, Mark?
I do, thank you. Aside from what has been done to close down the streets in and around Queen's Park, are you prepared for anything happening elsewhere in the city, and what exactly are you preparing for?
We do have a perimeter that we will shut down if need be in the downtown core that is primarily looking at the Queen's Park and City Hall, of course, and some adjoining areas. And that will be our focus in the downtown core, to protect that area and to make sure it's not occupied. But again, within that area, we will facilitate peaceful protest.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mark Douglas from 680. Mark, do you have a question?
Thank you, Connie. Question for Chief Raymer. We've heard some comments about the new state of emergency in Ontario. Do you expect the state of emergency and the crackdown measures that it allows will make for a reduced protest in Toronto this weekend, or could it possibly just make the convoy demonstrators mad and inflame the whole situation?
I think it was an important decision. I'm pleased with the decision to enact the state of emergency. I mean, we're assessing the tools that have been given to us, and you know, during the course of any demonstration or protest, we'll evaluate and determine whether any of them need to be implemented based on what is happening. But I can tell you that anything that we do in that regard will only be if necessary.
Do you have a follow-up, Mark?
Yes, thank you. Question for Mayor Tory. You mentioned how common it is to see protests in Toronto. I think anyone who lives in Toronto would agree with you, but I'd like to know just how you're feeling about all this. Did you ever imagine you would see in Toronto such an extreme reaction as to what we've been seeing with convoy demonstrators as they respond to what they don't like about the COVID and the pandemic protection measures? Is this whole convoy experience rather stunning to you as a politician?
If you'd asked me to imagine much of what we've experienced during the pandemic, I couldn't have possibly done so in advance of it actually happening. But I think that the nature of discourse generally, the nature of these kinds of protests generally, even the nature of sometimes the commentary back and forth between the media and people in life and public life has become much more polarized. It's become much sharper. I don't think it's good for the country. I think that, but again, bottom line is the same. If people are respectful and they're peaceful, and they understand that there's a limit to how long you can stay in a given place and continue to protest without interfering with the rights of others, then you take life as it comes. But I think some of this has gone way beyond that in all of those respects. And so, it's our job just to deal with reality as we find it. And I think some of this is, cause for a very serious reflection after this whole pandemic is over about the direction in which discourse and discussion and protest are going, because I don't think it's a good direction, but you take it as it comes.
Thank you. Next, we have Katie Nicholson from CBC. Katie, do you have a question? Katie, if you have a question, please unmute yourself.
Okay, great. This is for Superintendent Pogue and for Chief Raymer. I'm just wondering, last weekend, large trucks encroached on that barrier at Avenue, Bloor, and Queen's Park. What have you learned from that specific incident last week?
Well, we certainly are increasing the area of road closures. Again, we did have a number of trucks there and a number of protesters that descended on the area, but we were very clear that we weren't going to allow that to happen on a prolonged basis. So, as I mentioned last week, when it was safe to do so for both the residents in the area and our police officers on the ground, we did move in and ask those protesters and truck drivers to leave. And we did receive cooperation. We did have heavy tows in the area if we were faced with any resistance, but we were able to clear the area, and that's why I've asked again this weekend to have that cooperation again. Thank you.
And do you have a follow-up, Katie?
Yeah, the protesters were able to learn a lot from police last weekend in terms of what your mitigation efforts are. How do you plan for that, or any kind of counter planning that protesters might have to sort of circumvent the barriers and the planning measures that you put in place?
Good question, but I think I'll start with saying that we have better planners. And that's precisely what's involved. We have a very robust plan and some good people. So you asked about earlier about a learning point. Well, one of the things we learned about Avenue Road in Bloor is that we had small tourist police vehicles there, and there was a concern at one point in time that the large trucks were going to try to move them out of the way slightly so they could move further. Well, you'll see now that there are no small tourist vehicles parked at Avenue Road in Bloor, and that perimeter will expand. So yeah, we do learn things when we maybe try to decide what they are capable of or prepared to do. And so all of those things are taken into account into our planning. And I'll just emphasize again, it's very adaptable, it's very nimble, and I'm quite confident we're prepared for any eventuality.
Thank you. Our final questions go to Scott Laurie of the Toronto Sun. Scott, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thanks. Question for Chief Raymer. It's only been a few hours since state of emergency was declared by the Premier. What kind of discussions have you had about how that state of emergency will affect the response this weekend?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the first things we did was engage our legal team here in the service in the city to start examining precisely what the implications are of those changes and how we might use them if depending upon what we are confronted with. So those discussions are underway. Once we are satisfied with the information we receive, we will prepare that information in a form for our officers to understand and for our commanders to understand. And then, like I say, and as I said earlier, we'll evaluate based on what is happening on how it might be used. But again, those type of things based on the emergency will only be utilized if absolutely necessary. If it's the usual peaceful protests that we encounter in the city, I don't see it being required.
And do you have a follow-up, Scott?
Just on staffing, we've heard that some officers from the GTA have gone to Windsor. Has Toronto been asked to provide any extra help in Windsor?
This is what I will say too is this is a coordinated provincial plan by all the police services in Ontario, and we've created a regional approach, quite frankly, and we are not in Windsor at this time.
And that concludes today's news conference. Thank you everyone who has joined us today.
Okay.